Welcome, everybody. Find your seats. Lovely to have you here today. I'm Jacquie Molloy. Today is the third conversation in our three-part series, How We Are Changed. As we begin today's session, let's acknowledge the traditional custodians of the various lands where we are gathering. You can hold them in your mind, or you might like to write them in the chat. I'm in South Australia today and find myself on the Ngarrindjeri land. We pay our respects to elders past and present and acknowledge the spiritual strength and resilience of Australia's First Peoples and their deep and enduring connection to country, the land, the sky and the water and the animals who live there. How We Are Changed is a conversation series that we've been running about grief and loss and trauma. And I'm joined once more today by Kim Thoday, a seasoned aged care chaplain, as well as a past police chaplain in South Australia, and now also serving chaplain in the Defence Forces. Welcome, Kim.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much, Jacquie. Great to be here, and good afternoon, everybody. Interesting. The universe has its own way of getting to us at times. There's somebody who's just outside doing some whippersnipping outside of my booth, and they've just started up right now. I'm not sure. I hope that's not coming through. Can you let me know?
We're not hearing any of it, so we're all
right.
good.
Okay. All right. So if I occasionally look around, it's because of that noise all of a sudden. But look, it's so good to be here. Great to be amongst other practitioners and people curious and interested and excited about this topic. I want to also just acknowledge the Kaurna people here of the Adelaide Plains as well, where I'm currently located. Thank you, Jacquie.
Beautiful. Thank you. It's lovely to have you back. Today's session is all about how trauma changes us. But just to take a little step back and cover just a couple of the top notes of the last two sessions that we've had together. In the first one, we were speaking about, well, Kim actually gave us this great definition of spirituality, which talked about the sphere or domain of ultimate concerns, which I know a lot of you it really resonated to think of spirituality in that way of the ultimate concerns, and a wonderful way of sort of stripping back, a good image as well to hold. We talked a little bit about Connect To, and just the idea in general of connection and how important connection is, and also what its absence tells us about our own state or another person's state. And that flowed into our second conversation, which was about anticipatory grief. And that I think one of the examples that we talked about too was, for example, like a dementia diagnosis, how easy it is to skip to the worst case scenario, to jump to the end and begin that grieving process before there'd been a chance to really reconcile and determine how to maintain a relationship for as long as possible, whether that was, family relationships, a partner, a loved friend. And so we talked again about connection and the importance of staying connected to what's important to us, as not an antidote of anticipatory grief, but a way to sort of balance it out. There are obviously going to be situations where, we talked that anticipatory grief is part of the process. It can't be just, wished away. It is part of the process. And today we're talking about how trauma changes us. And I think, Kim, it's time to start another definition. We seem to be starting off with our definitions, but this is about a term, assumptive world, trauma and the assumptive world. Can you tell us a little bit about that, please?
Yeah, thank you. Well, there's lots of great work being done in this area by scholars and researchers and practitioners, and I'm pleased to say that many of much in the literature around trauma and trauma-informed care comes out of the work of practitioners who've also, many of them, done some academic work as well, and working in collaboration with others like social workers and psychologists and counsellors who've been dealing with this in this kind of area for a long time. And so, if you get into that somewhat, you will see that there is assumptive world theory that is used, that whole idea, that notion, that model of understanding what happens to people when they experience some very traumatic event. It dislocates our internal world, and death, particularly tragic death, but also death of a loved one, death of somebody who we've spent most of our life with, or even in a short space of time we've come to be very, very attached to. So just using death as an example of trauma, that can, not necessarily, but often does have the effect of shattering the assumptions, our own assumptions of who we are, our assumptions of what is true, the things that you spoke before, Jacquie, about our ultimate concerns, the things that we have regarded as non-negotiable kind of values, the things that we really believe in, those kind of elements and issues can be actually shattered. So there can be profound disconnects in those kind of areas, and that's often what is going on for people. For instance, for many people, there can be a feeling that there is this truth about the world, that the world is maybe benevolent, that the world has a certain kind of meaning that many people have, of course, a particular notion of God and the way that God works in the world. Well, trauma can come along, a traumatic event can come along, and really, another good word to use, I think, is destabilize. Can and I still come back to that word, and you'll see it in the literature. Often trauma has the effect of breaking up some of our ideas, shattering them sometimes, and that's often what is going on for people.
I mean, there's such good words, aren't there? There's such strong, powerful images. You've said shatter, dislocate, destabilize. It's hard to hear those words without kind of the visual impact. We have images in our mind that go along with those words. And I think, if you've been someone who your whole life has believed something, just innately, and have the core of your beliefs destabilized, shattered, as you say, that's a hard place to come back from. And this is where trauma is such an interesting topic of conversation, because there's trauma and the trauma response, and the trauma response can be such a long-lasting, not an exaggeration of the original trauma, but this prolonging. How do we get ourselves out of that? How do we help someone who is in our care, who may be stuck in trauma response.
Mm.
How do we meet them? Where do we meet them?
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. So look, I think certainly one of the first things in all of that is to be able to recognize that that's actually what you are dealing with. So yeah, look, it's important to have in your mind, however you want to think about this, in your back pocket. What are some of the dot points here? What makes something a
Mm.
traumatic response as opposed to a grief response, for instance?
Yeah,
Okay,
right.
and of
Mm.
course there's overlap there. So uh, some of the practitioners will talk about traumatic grief. In other words, what they're saying is that it is grief. And look, I often think that mourning and grief can have elements of trauma.
Mm.
Um, when it but when it crosses over into trauma, you're looking out for some of those responses, like all of a sudden a person just totally, they're not the same. They're not the same anymore. They've lost interest in the things that they've been interested in before. They're not letting go. The classic kinds of signs of this are, a person just struggling to be able to let go of the person who has died, and so they begin to just become really, really focused yeah, focused on trying to get that person back in a way, and that can be okay for a while, but if that becomes an ongoing an ongoing purpose in life, in a way, to keep a connection going that can't actually be, you know, that the manner of the connection that they used to have over time needs to change.
Yeah.
So it's at that level that we need to be able to see what's actually happening, um, be alongside that person, and eventually, often bit by bit, when when they're ready to some degree, but they might need some help too, because they just may never be ready, which can become a real problem, of course. Yeah,
But
so
while you're
it's
talking, Kim, I'm
mm,
thinking connect to again,
yeah,
because
yes,
how, I didn't realize when I asked you just then, where do we meet them? But connect to is a brilliant place to meet people, because you can have had a certain
yeah,
connection and belief in your
hmm,
life. Um, and as you say, trauma comes along, it's shattered.
yeah,
You're
yeah,
destabilized.
yeah,
But interacting with Connect to again, and specifically thinking about those 5 domains of connection with self, connection with others,
yeah,
connection
mhm,
to nature, connection to creativity, connection to something bigger. And it may just spark an idea. People may not have the connections, but they may see a spark of where they could. And I'm thinking particularly of nature, and of the solace that we can have of just being in a beautiful place,
mhm,
um, that we can see the beauty of nature, of something that is grand, um, and helps us to feel some perspective, I suppose.
mhm.
Um, might be helpful, but it still
Yeah,
comes back to connection, doesn't it? And disconnection, this whole conversation.
yeah,
Yeah.
it does. So there's profound, yeah, with trauma, one way to understand trauma is that there is profound disconnection at a profound level. Um, and sometimes there are multiple disconnections. There are layers of disconnection. I mean, look, it's useful. to think about it like this. And look, I think we mentioned it last time, Jackie. I think that you know, the journey of human life is actually about, to some extent, it is about a series of necessary losses.
Yeah.
Necessary separations. I mean, this happens from when, remember last time we went straight into this momentarily to say, even with an infant, as the infant
Yes.
begins those first steps away from that intimacy with their mother, and to some extent father as well, but a very, very maternal physical relationship with the mother. Of course, there's eventually, as the child is weaned, there is a separation there.
Yeah.
So actually there's probably I'm kind of guessing here. I've not actually read anything about this particularly, but I note that some of the theories do take that into account, actually, right there at that one of those earlier stages. But might be there might be a small element of it. Certainly, there are layers of trauma. Okay, so I'm not sure if I've mentioned this before. Jackie, can you remember if I've talked about the Jesuits? One of the
No,
my internet connection is a little unstable, everyone.
it is a
Or is it
little
just me?
unstable.
Maybe it's just me.
We're talking about destabilization. So
It could be me. It could be me that's unstable. Anyway, so yeah, so the Jesuits, the Jesuit order, have this wonderful notion, because they were the great educators, and still occupy that space in some circles. So they would say that our greatest theological lesson, and you could say our greatest philosophical lesson, is actually learned before we're 1 year old. I don't know if I've mentioned this before.
you
And
haven't.
look, I'm sure yeah. So it's worth listening to this, because it forms the basis of their whole way of viewing education, actually. Which has influenced the wider world over time. But yeah, our greatest, for those who have a theological view of the world, your greatest theological lesson is learned before you're 1, and that's whether the world is good or bad.
Ah,
And you kind of go, yeah, actually, of
yeah.
course. So what that raises then is the reality that, for some, depending on what happens to you in those months before you're 1 year old, for some children, even at that, will experience forms of trauma. We know that, with neglect and other things,
Yeah.
and it affects us. So anyway, yeah.
Yes, so it's not just about changing your worldview. It can be about informing your worldview.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, that's right.
Um, that's right, because we're sort of thinking that trauma, like it's neutral, and then trauma comes along. But actually, there's no such thing as neutral, because, as you've just pointed out, by the age of 1, we've already made a determination. So
To some degree.
yeah, to some degree. So trauma will either compound
Yeah,
or alter.
yeah.
Yes.
So
Interesting.
there's yeah, trauma is often has layers to it, layers that go right back. Um, but it raises the other notion, is that, look, for many people, for many children, they exist in this wonderful world, really wonderful world, particularly between 0 and 1, where love is just poured upon us.
Mm.
Well, that's so the psychologists would come in and say, well, actually, that's what shapes us in many ways, you know, that degrees of goodness, or, you know, indeed degrees of trauma in there as well. So if you just go with those of us who've had very benevolent, you know, largely benevolent upbringings, when there is some major trauma that comes, let me throw an example in which might be very meaningful for our audience here. When something happens to you, actually, in the modern Western world, that we would regard as some criminality happens to you, whereby you have been treated in such a way, when a crime has been committed against you, physically, sexually, mentally, emotionally, abuse of some major kind, then, and particularly when it comes, maybe you've experienced it from a benevolent institution.
Yes.
Yep. Like a welfare organization, like a church. Wow. Now you're talking about, are you talking about layers actually here of trauma?
Yeah.
And in the first instance, the benevolent world that was meaningful, that you thought was safe.
Yeah.
And that maybe for some, and God, you know, God protects you. And you've got an institution. So here's the various layers, and you've got an institution that stands for protection and has all of this history about love and, you know, compassion
and it's not just that you should be able to trust this organization or institution based on what it says it stands for, but there are all these people around you who do believe and who do experience it as a trusted organization. So what does that say for you? Do you doubt yourself? Is it your issue, not theirs? You know, there's more layers in there.
Yes, yeah. So that's why I think assumptive world theory is actually really important for us all. But it's not a one size fits all thing. We will experience that in all sorts of different ways. But there's no doubt about it, when we have, you know, grief and loss to some extent can affect that assumptive world. But trauma has the effect of shattering us. We go to pieces. You know, we use that language actually. I've
Yes,
fallen
exactly.
apart.
Yeah. Fallen apart.
I can't make sense of things anymore. The very people I thought I could trust, I can't. And now I'm even questioning God.
Yes.
God, where are you in all of this?
Yes.
Why didn't you do something, for instance?
Yeah.
So
We've got a question in the chat for you, Kim.
sure.
From Kathy. For many elderly people, a move to aged care can be traumatic, as well as a grief event. Often
Yeah.
their ability to let go and accept their new normal is extremely difficult because of the loss of connections from their old normal. Any advice?
Thank you, Kathy. Great question. One that still I still struggle with, and I think we need to be troubled by it to some degree. But I think we need to be people of great hope as well. So why do I suddenly say both those things? Because it's easy to go one way or the other. I would say, Kathy, one of the first things is, and I think it's almost implied in your question, is that I think not enough time is spent with our beautiful, beloved. They're not always beautiful, by the way. You know what I mean? They're human beings, but you know what I'm saying. It's a person with a history, a person of value, because they're a human being, and they're people that other people entrust, their families entrust them to our care. And not enough time is taken by the institutions and by the staff and people like myself to actually validate their feelings of catastrophe. Now, they may not use that language, or their feelings of shattering. So you're quite right. I think we need to do a whole lot more listening. That's what I mean by that first. And it needs to be validated, and they need to be able to. The number of times I've just seen a, a situation of despair at least be ameliorated, not healed straight away usually, but at least amelioration kind of is a great word to use, because it's about managing and helping empower a person, and at least if we are listening, and at least if a person is being listened to, the number of times and that their story, if they've got a feeling that you are understanding, and you're not just kind of whitewashing the situation, and what their feelings are real, it makes a difference. And then you've actually got you're on the way to some restoration. What we also need to be is people of hope, and that they can move through this. So we've got to kind of keep the two things in tension. We've got to we've got to be able to absolutely empathize, and not move to try and fix the situation too quickly, but at least be on the journey with them, if that makes sense. And to be looking to be people who are saying, hey, look, eventually, look, things are going to get better. But you don't want to go there too quick, because I think that's so often what we do with our lifestyle programs and all the rest of it. We come in and say to people, hey, yeah, look, it's all going to be okay. You've just got to look, you just got to get involved with this. Look, come along to bingo, and everything will be okay.
Yeah. And sometimes we just need a little bit of time sometimes. And I mean, as we've talked about before, not all grief is a bad thing. It's a necessary part of how we also move forward. Sally had said, I think this is when we were talking about nature, she said, solace is a great word. It doesn't solve or fix, but it comforts. And I noticed that Sal also replied to Kathy in a similar way, but I'm thinking, isn't it of great benefit to ourselves outside of trauma and grief and loss to consider what our own personal catalogue of balm is? What are the places that we find can soothe us, that we can maybe not necessarily fall back on straight away. We may not feel like it, we may resist it, but just knowing that we know what suits us might be an important help, particularly when we get to the point of others needing to care for us.
Yeah, that's really, really good. That's so good. I think we have a really special. We have quite a unique. When I say we, I'm talking about if I can speak generically. For those who when I say generically about spiritual carers, I'm meaning those who are offering religious care, those who when you're explicitly invited by a person of faith to offer some resources, to offer some help that speaks into that space for them. I'm talking about those who are come into aged care or any kind of care, as pastoral carers, which is a bit broader, and then broader again, those who are there to look after people of faith, but no faith, and everything in between.
Yes.
So to this generic group, which I'm hoping is all of us here today, you have there's something that you can do actually, that is specific, that is really, really important. We haven't got a monopoly on it, however, because others can do this, even if it's just occasionally. Others can get alongside, and can listen and care at a very, very deep level. There are every now and again you come across people who've had no training in some ways, but they've just got this incredible gift, at a certain, in a certain way, to be able to, because I think, so many people, if I can just come back to Kathy's question again, in our aged care facilities, and increasingly in their own homes, when they're receiving some form of aged care, can feel terribly alone, misunderstood, not understood, um, getting just lost in the system, having so many different people coming and asking all of these questions that don't make any sense to them, just to be listened to be validated, to know that you're going to come back.
Yes. Yeah.
So, are you going to? I would say there's three things I got to keep reminding myself. If I'm in their situation, and we're all going to be there one day, however that works out, we will, to some degree. This can happen at any moment in life, when there is something that just catastrophically happens within our family or to ourselves. Okay, so are you going to be my friend? People are asking that question, whether they're framing it that way. We just have to have the ears to hear. In their anger, when they're having a go at everyone, and having a go at us and all the rest of it, are you going to be my friend? A second one would be, are you going to come back? It's about connection, isn't it? It's about connection.
It is.
Is this, are you just going to be another agent, yet another one of these? I don't even understand what they are, but they're talking about agency very often, or are you just another person on a roster? So there's that piece. And then, so are you going to be my friend? Are you going to come back? And the last one is the most important one. And just about all of us will ask this at the deepest level. Do you love me?
Goodness.
Now that one can just be written off as, that there would be cynics around that would just perhaps write that off. And of course, we've got to be careful about how that is understood, particularly in a world where we need to be abuse aware in our care as well. And unfortunately, that one we really need to be acutely aware that people may misread us. But if we come at it collaboratively, and we come at it, and we do this kind of care in an open and transparent way, that piece is squarely with us. Now, when I say that, Others, let's not get caught up in the old imperialism or paternalism that somehow we're the only ones that can do that. No, we can't replace families
Mm.
and some others, right? But for me they're the three there's the Trinity for me
Yeah.
of spiritual care. And that comes out of the literature. Certainly it's there in my experience, but it comes out of the literature too of other practitioners. Um, those three things. Um, People need to know that they are worth something. And that's what people pick up subliminally, I think.
Oh, I think,
It might
yeah,
take a while, yeah, but when the assumptive world has been shattered,
yeah.
how can I love again? How
And
can I trust again? How can I trust
yeah.
to know that actually, yes, there is a constant actually. There
Mm.
is a constant. And ultimately it seems to me that all of the great arts and literature and music and religion, when it's doing the right thing, points to love being the greatest
Love is the thing, isn't it?
of all.
It's yeah. I mean, there's some beautiful notes in the chat as well. One of the things that I love about those three questions, Kim, is that it forces you into a posture of acknowledging the individual and the individual identity of the older person. And it creates the dynamic for the older person to have at least one piece of evidence that people are good. And
Mm.
that is something to build on. I'm aware of the time.
Yeah.
I would be remiss to not tell you about Kim's fantastic workshop next week on Tuesday on grief, loss, and trauma. I'd encourage you to attend. It's in the chat now. Thanks, Sal. See you next time. I'd encourage you to come along to Kim's workshops. We run these workshops. We as you know, we don't charge for our webinars, our free webinars and these sorts of conversation series, but our paid workshops is how we to do that. So we don't get government funding, so every little bit helps. So if you're the least bit interested, I would say please go and explore all of this more in the workshop with Kim. I think Marnie's also going to put up the links for the previous two conversations. If you've missed out on one or two of those links were in the last call email you would have received today, but they might also be in the chat. And I suppose another question I would ask is we're always looking for different ways to frame and format both our conversation series and also our workshops. If there's anything that is getting in your way to listening to our webinars, to coming along to our paid workshops, please let us know. We love that feedback. Is it the timing that's not right for you? Is it perhaps the ticket price? We're always exploring ways to make sure we're providing the very best, most interesting information in the realm of spiritual care and aged care. So Kim's workshop on grief, loss and trauma next Tuesday, the 14th of May, 1 p.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time. Kim, it's been a delight. It's been
Thank
an
you.
absolute
Likewise.
delight.
Likewise. Very, very much so.
Yeah. So we're going to
Thank
find
you,
a
Jacquie.
way of doing some more of this, I think.
I'm just very grateful for people's interest and that they see this, rightly so, as just so important. So, yeah, may we continue to collaborate and
Mm.
do work together. I love getting feedback and other people's ideas, and we need to do more of that collaboration because none of us have all the pieces
No, exactly.
of the puzzle, actually. Yeah.
That's right. And thoughts spark other thoughts. So that's what we're here for. Thank you, everybody, so much for being a terrific audience through this. And yeah, thank you, Kim. Always, always a delight. That's it. That's all we've got time for. We've run over again. So thank you, everybody, and we'll see you later.